welcome to Concept to Culture. It's been very interesting for me, like I was mentioning to Akshata just before we began to record, that it's been phenomenal to be able to connect with so many different people with their niches. And today we are here to talk about designing for change, climate, culture, and consciousness. And to talk about this, we have with us today architect Akshata. Before we get ahead and talk about something so nuanced and layered, I'll maybe ask Akshita to introduce herself and tell us a little about what she does.
Thanks, Pooja, and thanks for having me here. Hello, everyone, and I'm Akshata. Pooja introduced, I'm an architect, and then I am also an artist. So my work right now basically is how do we, as architects or different professionals, or like even part of construction industry, how do we build better is something which I'm working towards. So at Rainmatter Foundation, which is basically a funding and then like in a ecosystem orchestrator, we tend to like identify the partners and then like who are working for bettering whether it's the government, policy, finance, or like even the basic design guidelines, right? So we work with them to kind of like enable better buildings. So that's the core of my work right now. So yeah.
That's lovely. So I think for you to really niche into something like this, right, than the conventional mainstream structural work that we sort of look at, you have gotten into a very intentional form of design, right? There is aesthetics, there's functionality, and I think in today's world, why I was very intrigued with the work you do is it's also very intentional. So when did that transition really happen? When did you begin to see that for you, design was more than just function and about something looking good?
So I think the exposure existed because I never lived in a tier one city, right? It was always like tier two, tier three, and the towns, villages. There, the way the living happens, the culture, and then how do they design? Because a lot of the time, if you see in these places, architects doesn't exist, but you still have
Yeah.
homes and the places being built, right? And they're all very functional if you actually look at it, and they're all done for a certain purpose, right? So it's probably the exposure started from them. But then during college time, we used to have this documentation. We would go for like I still remember we went for Badami documentation, and then we would have these community works and everything, right? I think the trigger came from there, like what's the importance of design in a normal day-to-day life, or else even for any change, right? The trigger started from there, and then slowly that also led to the kind of the work that I chose
That
to
you do.
start doing there. Yeah.
Yes, 100%. I think even now I'm so nostalgic about those documentation days. I don't
Oh
know if
yeah.
we realized then, right? But now, being in the fraternity, having more consciousness with what is happening, I think in hindsight, there was so much that we learned, so much that we sort of grew with, right? Not just making
Yes.
those drawings, but culturally being part of something so powerful. So I think if you could, would you be able to sort of tell us what is a particular climate or social issue that you've tried to solve, maybe through a project of yours or something that you've been able to work on in the last little bit?
Yeah, definitely. In my earlier avatar, which is where like so impact sector, when you see there is like implementation side and then there is like the supporting side, right? So my career started or like my work started with the implementation side, where you actually have to go to the community, convince them like why do you have to design or like build like this? So there, I think a few changes or like few realities that I saw there was like um, it's basically how much we as designers actually think that uh, we know it all, one, and then second is also we tend to ignore the traditional wisdom or the culture because we lived in a certain way. All of it is influenced by the way we understand our context, geography, climate, and everything, right? So that way, one example would actually be this is a pottery workspace which was in Dharwad. I'll actually give two examples because that would give you like an understanding. Dharwad, which is like his earning would be around 6,000 to 7,000 per month, which is not a lot when for the kind of the strata we are all living in, right? But for him, that's actually a lot. And so it's a very dingy, dark place. And pottery is an art craft, right? And you need like good amount of lighting. And especially when you're doing an intricate work, you need like more better lighting. And in all of this, Dharwad being one of like near the plateau, and then like it's North Karnataka, right? At the end of the day, it's still hot and little dry. So how do you now design for a place like this? Because we don't
Right.
get to, first of all, get exposed to something like this, right? So then we had to understand his day-to-day activity, his work system, and then like what are the problems around his buildings and everything. And then we design and then also build for him. Within 2 months, his productivity and his income was able to change up to 10 to 15,000, which is actually a lot for him. It doubled down, right? And on top of that, normally, I mean, when summer comes in, we have an option of switching fan or like getting an AC or cooler and everything. For them, it's still like a luxury, right? So he was able to comfortably work even during summer and then churn out whatever the amount of the pots that he has to. So this was one thing that really like, oh, it's just like adding one single window in a specific place for us, right? But then it actually changed a lot for a person like a Potter. Similar example in Odisha, Puri Jagannath Temple, and then the this Potter community again. They go through cyclone every year, right? And twice that too. But then they couldn't continue their work because the cyclone happens. Don't have electricity, and you have to stop working because you don't have better buildings, right? So part of the work there was like, how do you build cyclone resilient community working spaces? So we did that, post that. Until now, all the cyclone they have been working, and then they were able to reach the production capacity that they have to, and all these potters actually supply to Puri Jagannath Temple. So
Mm.
there is still, I mean, that's the thing, right? When a climate risk or like when heat increases, for us it's we still continue to live, but then there is a
Yeah.
layer of the society which gets impacted, and how do buildings or design can actually enable them to function. So this I think is the one example, I mean two examples that I would like to give. So yeah.
Right. This is lovely. Very inspiring, first of all, right? To be out there and to say that there is more. Like you said, there's a layer of the society which equally deserves good buildings, good infrastructure, right? This was something I wanted to bring up in the second half of our podcast, but I think it's the best time for me to ask you this. Um, how much do you think empathy is required, right, when we make these buildings? Because we make storytelling so romanticized when it comes to architecture and design, right? But when you go into spaces like this, like you said, there you needed to really get off your pedestal of saying, as an architect, I know everything. We don't. There's so much more, right? So how do we sort of work on, like, if from your learning, right? How do you think empathy and storytelling has really helped you sort of resolve a lot of these issues?
Right. So I would say how much ever that's possible, 120, 200%, because these are all the communities that are going through a lot, or like even if it's like when you're using design to solve for something, you have to have like 110% of empathy, sensitivity, and then like we should be humble because we should be at the level where they are and then be in their shoes and then understand the different aspects that they're going through, right? Because normally we designers or like this whole fraternity that we have, we tend to kind of like uh, go in a very structured format. Hey, what is this? What are your requirements and everything? Like we end it
Yeah.
only there. But then there is something beyond that, like a woman actually will be using their kitchen or like working in the angan or the courtyard for a certain period of the time. Then how do we consider that while we are also designing? And there are like these cultural beliefs and everything. Like it's still a stigma that not a lot of them still want their toilet to be attached to their homes because
Mm.
culturally they still don't. And we have sanitation schemes everywhere, which is like adding it to the part of your home, right? So how do you now sit with them, understand the place they are coming from, convince them, and then like make sure they understand how this is gonna help them? So for that, you have to have like how much ever empathy that's possible, you have to bring that, be sensitive, and also humble, because sometimes these experiences or conversations also humbles you a lot.
Yeah.
So yeah. So
I think that is the most fulfilling thing of doing what you're doing. I'm sure it comes with its own challenges, right? We talk about, like you said, when we speak about designing a space, this is not even a thought, right? When you're designing a city, you will think about, okay, I need to think of a toilet outside of the house. It's almost, we've adapted so much to think of what's happening in the metropolitan cities, right? So, what I want to sort of ask you is we have a very set design process in the sense there is a site analysis, there is zoning, there are so many different things. But in a situation like this, what are some processes which you all take up to, create designs?
So here, from the professional side or from the way we have to function, I think those processes still holds good there. But then when you're interacting with here, the clients are actually the different user groups, or like when you talk to government, the kind of the processes that they come from is very different, right? Or even a policymaker. So there, I think while we maintain our own processes, because that's our way of functioning, right? But we don't have to kind of like put that on them also to follow it. So that's where I think being a little flexible, because we have been a bit flexible. Like when you go to a community, you can't just directly go and tell, hey, I need to do site analysis. You have to have a conversation with them first and
Right.
understand like who are the different people. And then before that, who should you be even speaking? Because a lot of the time misrepresentation happens, and then like how do you avoid all those kind of like the challenges, right? So multiple times you have to go and then speak with them, or like the different stakeholders that are there, and then from there, while you're doing your background study and everything, like to understand the place and the context, you have to speak to a lot of people there. A lot of the time, we designers don't speak to different stakeholders that are there. Like when we are designing, do we speak to masons and then like design our buildings?
Hmm.
Normally, we don't tend to, right? So it's also things like that. So I wouldn't say there is a lot of change in the way this side works. It's still same, but being flexible, because in the normal traditional system of designing and then building, I think you have a system set, process set, and everybody follows that. And everybody understands that because we all come from like that understanding, right? Here, that understanding doesn't exist. So flexibility is something which you have to be very much aware and then be open to. So yeah.
And I think, what do you really think is when we say, because you're working so much hands-on with communities and it's a varied set of communities, right? Like you said, the community maybe in Dharwad is very different from the approach you would take maybe in Odisha or any other place. So how important is it to really make these communities as part of your concept? To, in some sense, convert whatever you execute. It is cultural, whether you like it or not. I think we live in such a diverse setup in India, right? Where there is going to be a cultural influence and it's very, very context driven, right? So I think even with what you're telling us is I cannot ignore the fact that your Dharwad potter, we need to be thinking about his a cultural approach and also a very contextual approach. So how much of involving communities when you work with them in your concept really enhances the cultural expression that finally comes out.
I would say like almost 100 percentage, like
Mm.
because I'll tell you why. I would deviate from community to place here, because
Yeah.
place plays a very important role here. Because community, for example, right now we're all very much neutralized because migration has started happening, and then like that culture, tradition, understanding of the place have started reducing, right? So I would actually
Yeah.
move that focus to the place instead of the community. Because when we talk about place, culture, tradition, the traditional wisdom, climate, geography, your materials, the design principles, all of it will come in, right?
Hmm.
So, and I would put it at the center of the design actually. It's not even like you're doing it at the end, adding it, but it needs to be where the starting point. Like if I'm building somewhere in Tamil Nadu now, Do I understand the risk that is there? What is resilience means there? What is low footprint means? What is net carbon? Like we have all of this, right, as building sector for climate change and everything. So uh, place becomes very crucial there. And then community is one of the actors there. So that's how I think we look at it. And that's also, so until now, I was giving you the implementation side of the aspect, right? Now I'm also moved towards the supporting code. That's my crux now. So where if people are doing it, how do you bring in the placements or how do you support them? Say, which is where I think if somebody is, say, for example, can every gram panchayat or can every town now have para architects because they have engineers, but why not architects, right? So then what needs to be done for that in terms of the policy, in terms of the regulation? So who is doing working around that? So we come in and support there. So yeah.
And why do you think this is not something that is so popular in some sense? Why is it that, a lot of architects have not explored into niches like this? Could it be, like you said, maybe we're so culturally influenced with where we study, what is happening around us. It sort of sucks you into that whole, you're going into that particular path. Or do you sometimes think it's just lack of awareness? What do you think?
I think it's both because first we're all living in our own bubbles, and that bubble, I don't think so. All of us take that time and then effort to go beyond that bubble, which is also okay because all of us, and there is a dependent path that we all have looked at, and then we want to live in certain way, right? So, which is also for the professions that we are coming from. So that way, I think it's the environments that we are all living in, which becomes very crucial. Because for me, those experiences that I had in childhood also let me think, oh, why not design for community, right? So it's also the experiences, environments, the people that you're surrounded by, and all of it. That's first. Second, in terms of the awareness, yes, definitely. I think slowly in the past 5 years, a lot of the architects, designers, the whole ACD fraternity actually have started slowly moving towards like how do we now design or build better for society, ecology, or planet in general. So there is that shift happening because also I think this is where availability of information, everything. The digitalization has helped you now. Oh, someone else is doing, why not me, right? So access to information, access to what else is happening is actually reducing that lack of awareness. Um, and also, I think it's also the accountability, I think, to somewhere. How much are we taking that effort to go beyond? So, yeah.
100%. And I think I also feel this is something that needs to change at a grassroots level, right? How much of this is spoken to you as a young architect who's really blooming into multiple things? We were very lucky we got to do these documentation things. I think for us, architecture school like that exposed us, it was flexible, right? But I think there is, even if one or two of them pick up from this, like for you, you said the working with those communities in Badami triggered you for something bigger, right? So if we can change this at an educational level, change it in the sense maybe introduce something more, what do you think would be helpful at a stage when a designer is being, I think those 5 years are very critical. It's not about studying, it's not about just, finishing a degree in architecture. Are you choosing to get educated, right? And I
Yeah.
think it's a huge responsibility for educators and everybody in this particular. I think after a particular point, it doesn't matter whether you're an educator, you're a practicing architect, the entire fraternity together works towards a conscious world, right? So,
Yes.
what do you think? Because you've been working on this for a while, at an education level, if we have to introduce something, what is something, or maybe change something, what is something that we can do?
So that's one would be, I think, the basic understanding of like what education does for us, right? It's giving you skills. It's giving you like certain way of functioning or like certain way of problem solving. Whether it's engineering to architecture, your methodologies might be different. They're physics, but here design, right? So that fundamental understanding in the education system, I think, is a bit less. So that's something. Then if that change happens, I think the way we design the curriculum or the way we have the hands-on experiences and everything for the students, and then like the way we curate these internships, fellowships, and everything also changes because I'm working with, we are also partnering with Ethos Foundation, Geeta Balakrishnan, and then what they're also trying to do is like, how do you now plug in all these real time problems and then experiences into the education, right? While there is like a traditional education happening, how do you now plug in all of this? Right now, we are in that stage where we have to plug in. But then the change that needs to happen is it needs to be part of the curriculum. See, why is vernacular architecture or sustainable architecture an elective? It needs to be a mainstream one of the subjects to learn, right? Yes, services, BCM and all of it will enable you to think in certain way, will give you the practical understanding of it. But then where is the core principle that is being spoken about, which is what we are actually lacking and needs to be changed is what my point of view. So yeah.
Yes, and I think if there's something else that I want to sort of ask you at this stage, because we are talking about so many different layers of this, what has changed for you personally being in this journey? I think it's been about 5, 6 years. I think you've been working in this realm, right? What has changed for you personally?
Oh, a lot, I would say. I mean, I used to be an introvert girl who would actually not speak much, and I'll just like do my work and then get done, right? So from that, I'm actually speaking to you now in a podcast, right? So you could
Ah,
see that, and that's also, I think, is a learning, right? The hesitation that we come from, or the worldview that we come from, all of it actually has changed because the realities that we think as our realities is so different from what exactly it is. Because being on the ground, seeing things there, and for us, even if I don't work today or like for one more year, I will still have food on my plate. And whereas the realities on the ground is very different. And those are the problems I think through buildings, I would say again, we need to be solving because right now we don't look at it that way, and that's also one of the questions that I keep asking myself, like why is us as sector players are not looking at this? And other thing that has changed is I think as designers we are equipped to think systemically because we have to do plumbing, we have to do lighting, we have to have an understanding of electrical, structural, materials, and everything, right? If you actually take that and put it into the problem solving of systems now, that is actually, I would say, that helps you prioritize both personally and then professionally, like what exactly do you want to do. And then also when you're problem solving, when you're designing, you'll also think about ecology. Hey, where is my materials coming from? And all of it, right? So that's something which has changed because at least when I just graduated from the college, I used to look at like, okay, this is my site and I'll do this. My materials will come from like 1,000 kilometers away also. But that point of view have changed to like, oh no, I need to understand who are the local people who are doing it. Can I look at like something like a natural fiber and all of it, right? Going into the and also principally few things have changed. What are the priorities in terms of like human beings and then like I mean, that's also, I think, something which the place where I'm right now working also is exposing me to. Like, there is something beyond just us, right? Like the functional natural ecosystem, and we are all part of
mhm.
it, and we don't understand that. So things like this, I think, has changed, which is at philosophical level. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, right? To hear that it's not just I think that's the beauty about design. It's you cannot look at it as I am going to sit here design for 3 hours and forget about it. It's almost it seeps into your values, into choices you make in life, right? So if we have to talk a little more about climate, right? I think you all are working largely in the sector of climate. So what would you want to tell us about what's happening currently in the field of architecture when it comes to climate? If you can tell us both that you think is hope, right, which would could heal the planet, and also maybe to tell us that we are actually digging deep into disasters by doing something? If you can tell us both sides of it.
Sure. So I'll start with the digging deeper and then I'll end with the hope note. Because I think the way the guidelines or the way we are designing the material choices that we have, or like the approach of design thinking itself, I think we are digging deeper because we are more human centric. We are solving for humans only. But then when you talk about climate, it's broader than just the humans, right? It's also uh, me choosing this chair, is it actually cutting down some forest in some other area? That means the habitat destruction. That means actually after 10 years, I won't be having oxygen to breathe in, right? It's all system that we kind of like tend to ignore. So that's something which I think we need to change and then bring in that understanding of what is the true cost of the design that I'm actually doing. Where is it actually impacting? That's something which we are not actively doing. Because our priorities, like the sector's priority right now is like one, because there is a lot of residential and the commercial or like the functionality that needs to be provided. We are in that speed equals to growth mentality. But in that, while we are achieving that, what else that needs to be looked at? What are the different lenses that needs to be? I don't think so. We have that. So that's where the digging deep is happening. And also, I think this comes back to the education because climate change is a we think it as a future problem, though it is a current problem also. But then our future force, which is what the younger ones are not equipped to respond to it, which is where I think the problem is also going to be the most. Because right now, until 10 years or 15 years, we have the solutions, we have the opportunity to tweak and everything. But for them, it's going to be more of reaction and our
Yeah.
education system is not equipping them with any of that needs to be done for them. They're going to be suffering the most. So those two are the things. And also, I think we don't have accountability for the designs or the decisions and then everything that is made. So that structured accountability is required. I mean, there are more, but I'll stop here and then I'll go to hope part because there are people like Geeta or like there are people like Mason Singh and then there are like a lot of people like Manishala and then also at the government level, I see hope in them doing a lot of work to change the problems or the gaps that I just mentioned. Say, for example, Kerala municipality has actually, especially Trivandrum actually, they have set their first net zero carbon building cell. Everywhere it used to be climate action cell, but now the building cell has started. That means they have understood the importance of the building and how it can actually provide both resilience during the flood or whatever the different reasons. And then uh, even things like this are happening. Architects are coming together to solve for it. And then also Kerala has its own design policy, which I don't think so anyone else understands this, right? And we don't have a national design policy. And things like this needs to happen and there are conversations. So these are the things I think give some hope, while also a lot of the architects now, especially our generation, and also there are a few greater ones also who had been doing this, like Varanasi Satya Prakash sir, and then Neelam Manjunath, and a few other architects also. They have been doing this. I mean, this was never told to them as like something you have to tick box, right? This was the basic principle how they functioned on or designed on. So but I see that change happening with our generation and the younger that they want to move towards working towards this part of it, like solving. Climate change is a byproduct there, but then solving for community and the place is something which I see a lot of us doing where the hope comes from. So, yeah,
That's lovely, and hope that it's a cascading effect, right? Like drops of water make an ocean. Only if we can get a little more aggressive, like you said, conversations, there's dialogues, there are people who are bringing awareness about these things. And I think at the end of the day, it's a very intentional choice. We can talk about this for hours, right? But are you
yeah,
really going out there? And when you have to choose between two materials that has to come 1,000 kilometers, or are you choosing a local material? That's the game changer, right?
yeah,
So I think this is I've always said this in my podcasts. I sort of end my podcast with asking this question. I think your intention has been very clear through whatever you've spoken, really inspiring to see the kind of work you're doing, right? But if I'd want to sort of end this podcast with asking you, why is it that you are choosing to show up to do what you're doing right now? Because there are so many different things happening in the world, so many, so many opportunities, so many roles that you can play. But why exactly have you chosen that today in 2025, this is what I want to do? What is it that's driving you to wake up and say, this is what I want to do?
That's a very difficult question, but for me, I think and I keep asking this question to me every single day, like, why am I doing this? Because, like you said, it's not going to be very easy and then also very challenging, both professionally and then personally, and then like the kind of the interactions and everything. I think something that motivates me is like at the end of the day, when I'm sleeping, if I'm like thinking about it, did I have a good day or like did I do good? I think that is where the question also comes in like, okay, I did certain level of things that are actually good for the society and then this. That's one thing. But also the other thing is when we talk about solving, right, in general, whether it's design, physics, or through any other we tend to put that problem solving on someone else. Like someone else will come and do it for us, right? So that's where the question of, if not me, who? And I keep asking that to myself a lot. And then that's also the reason why I think at this particular time I'm here where I am. So yeah.
That's lovely. So inspiring, Akshita. Thank you so much. We hope that a lot of younger audience, especially, one of the reasons I wanted to do this episode was to tell people that, you know what, you could have done things conventionally, but there is somebody who's living by example. And I think that's very important, right? That, like you said, we can keep blaming the public policies, we can blame the government, we can blame everything around. But how much are you taking into your hands and saying, okay, change begins with me, right? So thank you so much for doing the such a wonderful job and really designing for change. Thank you.